All right, good afternoon. Welcome back here to Trader Minute. Great to have you aboard. We see a little change in the metrics here today on the market. In fact, the market vibe has pushed from a 6 yesterday down to a 1 today, and that's triggering a bearish signal here in the market vibe. The last time we saw a bearish signal was right back here. And, we saw a little consolidation and a whipsaw back into a bullish signaled bullish, and has been riding bullish since. So it's had a nice little run, bullish run, but is signaling bearish here today. Now, it's one of those things where the market vibe has gone from a 6 down to a 1, which suggests that the bulls still have more control over the market internals than do the bears, which is an unusual situation, to have, but is one that we've seen in the past happen a number of times, and generally plays out one of two scenarios. And one of those is not consolidation. One of those is either a really strong drop or a quick, fast snapback. And, I do expect one of those things to transpire, here overall. So that's the market vibe. We have two bearish Katie signals today on the board. One is Adobe, which I was surprised. This is the first bearish signal on Adobe in a long, long time. And well over a year since Adobe has triggered bearish on Katie. But is triggering bearish on Katie right now, and suggests a potential, trend to the downside here. Microsoft here as well, both triggering bearish on Katie. Now, Microsoft barely triggering, Adobe a lot stronger in terms of the consolidation risk, but both within the parameters to qualify, here for suggesting a downtrend is about to emerge on both names here. It's likely that the uptrends that have been on Nike with the Katie signals and the uptrends that have been on Target with the Katie signals, likely that they get snapped out. Target triggered all the way back here in July. It's been a nice run, but I think, well, depending on where it closes today, it'll probably close out there. So anyway, that's market vibe Katie signals, the metrics here with it. Now, as a kickoff a new 100K challenge, I'm looking at several things. We've talked about a few things, haven't pulled the trigger on anything yet, and it's one where, like I mentioned this morning, I don't think this market is buyable yet in terms of, hey, let's, today it dipped, let's go buy. And, I got a comment from one of you after the market rallied, 18 points off its lows, 18 to 20 points off its lows, saying, oh, it's time to buy. And, it's right back down towards its lows right now. These types of days, it's common to have that type of action, and it's common to close off of the lows. So, it's one of those where it depends on your perspective. If you're a day trader, sure, there's going to be bounces to trade and all of that. But if you're daily looking for the next kind of emerging trend, it's one of those scenarios where that type of bounce doesn't mean a heck of a whole lot here. So I've gone out, priced out a few things. I priced out some Adobe puts. Here it's one of those scenarios where, man, if Adobe were to bounce 50 cents to 80 cents tomorrow, those options would be about 10% cheaper. Yeah, that would kind of be nice to be able to get. Some of the more bearish stuff is a little bit more expensive in terms of some of the option values, including things like a Micron. Where do you put your stop at, with something like a Micron? So, for me, it's going to be, if I'm going to play puts, I want to buy the puts on a little bit of an uptick in the morning. Looking at some of the call scenarios, I think they're just all too early. AT&T, I think it's too early. UPS, I think it's too early. It's one of those where I could play UPS off of today's lows, but that's about $2 away, there for me. Chipotle, too late, right? This is one we were talking about yesterday. The two that, that we talked about yesterday that I wanted to wait for a pullback, Discover, is having that pullback here today. Been watching the volume on it here today. It's about going to end where it was yesterday. Capital One here as well. And these are two that really kind of made a strong push about midday today and then started to fall off again. And we're seeing a lot of that from some of the outperformers. Some of the stocks that really started to make a little bit of push that weren't in the consumer staples or utilities area, have really kind of gotten sold into. Their rallies have really been sold into overall here. So, yes, I have a little better risk-reward scenario, but for me, if I'm going to buy it, at this point, we're trading, right? We gap below the 7-hour moving average this morning. We've been trading below the 7-hour. I need to see a recapture of that 7-hour for me to go jump in, and that's what I'll be looking for with both of Capital One and Discover. So I kind of like the pullback overall, but, let's face it. You can have the best stock in the world, and if the market itself decides it wants to, collapse, it's going to affect that stock. Apple. This is one that my brother yesterday said, you need to get into Apple. And I kind of chuckled because he never says that. And, I said, I'll give it a little bit. But it's held up remarkably well today. Remarkably well. In fact, you look at some of the biggest names out there and some of the ones that, yes, AT&T, UPS, those types of things, sure. But, Apple holding up here today. Fund managers are not selling their Apple. And, that's even with Apple in what many are arguing or some are arguing isn't an overbought position. But there's been no real sell here. Tells me, look, we get a little bit of strength tomorrow. We get a little bit of strength later this week, something like that. Apple be tops on my radar to look to be a short-term buyer of. It's held up a little bit better than Amazon, albeit, Amazon hasn't exactly collapsed here today like some of the other FANG stocks, Facebook, Netflix, kind of included in that, in that area. It's one of those where you take a look at something like a Boeing here today. And, how much upside are you going to expect to the market if a Boeing is, looking pretty ugly? Probably not a heck of a whole lot, right? Something like a Micron, okay. For me, I think there's an interesting bottom pick here. And, I talked about copper. I talked about FCX here this morning. And it's coming back into the October-November lows. So it's erased this kind of monster rally that it had in December, which was a monster rally. And you can see the volume on it today. You can see the CCI down here, almost to minus, almost to minus 300. And generally, when you get a CCI that's minus 300 with a monster volume, generally there's a really nice snapback. Of late with FCX, the snapback has come about a week or two later. It's taken some time to kind of base here a little bit. But this is one where there's been a lot of option activity on the stock today. In fact, let me show it to you here. You can see 112,000 calls and 37,000 puts. And almost half of the calls have been traded on the ask price. So have been purchased, right? So this is something that has been, the puts are pretty even across, the bid and ask. So if you're doing calls on the ask price, that means you're buying calls here on the stock. And, this is a higher open interest name, so it's not, we're not talking about meteoric levels here, but even just look at the 14s for September 21st. And the volume here on these options, it's just massive. And, you can look at, what they filled at here all day. They've been filling from anywhere early on to 70 cents, but some of the big blocks have all been under 60 cents. So, it's not like they bought these early on and the stocks continued to go lower. They've started to buy these and the stock is kind of held up here We see it on the 14.5s for August, middle August. Big volume at the 14. So they're buying the at the money names here is where a lot of the action is. 10,000 on the 7th of September, 14.5 calls. When it had open interest of 15, and there's 10,000 today. Just massive call buying here in FCX, and a lot of it in blocks. So this 10,000 wasn't a whole bunch of different people. This was a block, and it was it was something that suggests it was on the buy. You never know 100% sure, and you don't know if it's a short seller who's locking in some profit or something like that. But, FCX has had monster option activity today, and one that the option activity, you can never say whether it's call or put or upside spec or downside, but it does suggest a lot more upside today than downside. And, I mean, even you just go a week after, and there's 15,000 in volume, and it's these big blocks that have that have come in here with it. So it's some massive money stepping in, buying these options, and it's one where the stock has had some monster volume on it here today. So if you're looking for that snapback, if you're looking for that quick hit reversal in this market, and you're looking at where to play it, well, this is where a lot of money is playing. And, let's face it, we're talking about Freeport-McMoRan that, is trading at now, 2 times book after this move. So it's not an expensive name. It has plenty of free cash flow. It has plenty of value in terms of just price to earnings there. It's I think it's a sub 10 PE ratio, but a forward PE ratio somewhere around 14, maybe 13 after today's move. But, we're not talking about a massively expensive stock here. And, so one way to possibly play that, especially if you think the U.S. dollar is going down. That one, very interesting here today. The other one that I find, or the other action that I find to be really curious today, and I shouldn't think too curious of it, is IBM. And one of the things we have seen out of IBM over the course of the last while is on these big down days in the market, IBM has held up very well. It's had some of these days where it just holds up really well. It doesn't mean that it's kind of taken off afterwards, but it's held up really well. And we talked about IBM and the earnings, and just about how cheap this stock is right here, just fundamentally. And if I come into something like Y charts, I'll show it to you here, as I know we have a few new people with us. And I'll just come in here, take IBM. And we'll just pull up, let's go 10 years on a fundamental chart here. We'll bring in revenue. So you can see on IBM, the revenue is starting to uptick. It's been one of the few stocks that has continued its revenue recession. And then if you look at, if we look at dividend here, the dividend yield, you can see that IBM is up here at 4.28. This is one of the highest in its history. In fact, if we go back to Max, it's one of just the absolute highest out there. If you subscribe to the dogs of the Dow type of theory, you become very bullish on IBM over the course of the next year. And if you take a look at some of the other metrics for IBM, they are at areas that, it's not great, fantastic, wonderful, but at areas where they're at some 10-year lows, like price to book and things like that. And they deserve to be there. But if they start to increase their margins and revenue, we're talking about a stock that's severely undervalued given overall conditions, and that could easily be trading up around 180. So for me, this is one where, I haven't stepped into it with short-term options or anything here just yet, but, this is one that starts to move back above the 7. I think it could be a really interesting, really interesting buy going forward, and one of those where you're not going to hear a lot of people talk bullish about it, and for good reason, but one that the bar is very, very low, and so if we see we see some things kind of coming in that are a little different here, one that I would like to play. For the challenge, I'm going to go into the close here today, most likely in cash again. And I got a signal on Adobe, but I don't want to take it here just yet. So I'm going to be a little bit cautious here with that. And I do think there is that flush risk out there. So to go step in and buy a little bit of a dip here just yet, I am a little bit concerned that it might be just a little early here. With that, I've been watching the VXX, push on up here today. Would love to see another day or two push there, and just go buy some VXX puts and let them go. I think that would be a very good trade to start off the challenge with, and one that would pay off very, very nicely. So those are some of the things that I'm looking at going into the close. We get a little bit of gap up tomorrow with something like a Discover or Capital One pushing above the 7. I'll look to take that and trade that. We will have some Walmart earnings tomorrow morning that could get interesting, and possibly some Apple if we're looking at a little bit of strength early on tomorrow. Thanks for hopping on. Have yourselves a great one, and we'll talk to you later. Take care.